What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Tam and Bear UniVersus Super Show, a radio call-in show where you can be the special guest live over on the channel. If you have questions and you're live over on YouTube or Twitch, all you got to do is over on Twitch type an exclamation point, ask a question. But basically, it is I have a ticket system inside of my Discord called Ask Tam a Question. Open up a ticket. Write down your question, come be on the show, and me, you, and Bear are going to talk about your question for about 15-20 minutes. Up next, we've got Rebby, who has a similar question, but not quite the exact same question, in the same idea. Rebby, take it away.
Hi, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we are
Yes.
wonderful.
That is great. Okay, so as someone that kind of focuses around the new player experience and how to really enhance our game to create lower barrier to entry, my question is, what do you think is a consistent new player mistake when they pick up this game? Is there something or a certain timeline that new players should be following to truly understand the core mechanics of the game and excel?
Dang, Barrett's thinking. Holy cow.
I'm digging, dude.
He's
I don't
digging.
I don't know. I mean, full disclosure. I think this question, it makes me think a lot about my job as well, right? Yeah. I think.
What's the next IP, Barrett? That's the question she really asked.
Actually, yes.
Well,
I'm
I
kidding.
thought. Well, I thought the.
What's the
I thought
next
the Street Fighter
new
deck's already
player
announced.
question?
Oh. I mean, so I guess let's talk about with the resources that we have, and then let's talk about what we or I believe, or I don't know if Tam wants to jump in on it, of what's the next step after that. So the resources we have are the demo experience, which has been changed multiple times. We have the step after that, according to the company, which is the starter decks, which, if we've talked about the recent ones, including the Critical Role, there's an upcoming Ninja Turtles one, and AOT had two of them, right? Where mixed opinions, of course, because the characters were like not at the same level as the other ones. And then the step after that, which is like a challenger deck, but then you have different level of challenger decks, right? Because like I would say that the Deku challenger deck is maybe not super beginner friendly versus like picking up honestly like any of the Critical Role ones or even like the Godzilla challenger deck. And then you have the step after that one, which is, hey, you got to make your own deck. A constructed deck. What we have. I
Right.
think the challenger decks are very good entry points. I think thematically they follow a gimmick, and following trends in card games is what people are familiar with. You know, I use the word archetype a lot because that's a Yu-Gi-Oh term to me. Or I know some people will say like blank tribal, where you like are trying to force a mechanic, right? So with Toga 3, for example, she builds herself, right? Or she's like, I play weapon tribal. Ochako plays high attack tribal. When you like put those two decks against each other,
Right.
I think those are good starting points. I think, like, to get back to the question, they teach you the core mechanics of the game. They teach you ways to beat each other when you like put them against each other, and they do a okayish job at like teaching you the timings of the game because there's so many layers. I'm going to give you my personal recommendation on what you do to move one step past the challenger deck, because as of what we just said is, hey, you have to build your own deck. I think if you take a challenger deck that you really like and you try just putting in new stuff that you know already fits that typal, is the best way to start that. For example, my first event I ever played in was a Street Fighter booster release draft events. I got into that pre-release, etc. Those came with a Chun-Li and Ryu starter package when they came with two decks, and they were meant to be played against each other. Well, I don't like Ryu or Chun-Li, and so I was like, I want to play Guile. Guile's cool. I want to play Guile. Well, Guile doesn't have a deck. But Guile says on his character card, hey, you need to play charge and slams. And he builds foundations. So in my head, I go, I need charge and slam attacks, and I need to build cool foundations. That was what I needed to do. And I think that is genuinely the first starting point for a lot of players, because as soon as the new player goes and pulls up UVS Ultra, which is a mess. I know it's not very new player friendly. Or they go onto the deck builder and they go look for every charge and slam on these symbols, and they go look at cool foundations to build in, and they jam 60 cards together. It is a start. And when they take that deck that they built themselves and they play it against their locals or their other players online, and they start the conversation, hey, what do you think of this? I made it myself. Hopefully they're nice people. And the response typically should be, I see what you're trying to do here. Let's talk about it. And I think that's the beginning of the pathway. And I think that's just what I'm trying to get to, is I think that's the beginning of how we get to whatever kind of player that you want to be. Whether that ends up being competitive. You're like, dude, this is so close. You're ready? Like, I like punches and ranged attacks or whatever. You're like, wow, this is so close to the Mina 2 deck that's a terrorist right now in the competitive format. Let's give you Mina 2 and see how it works out. And you play Mina 2 and you're like, whoa, I have a competitive deck and I'm going to learn how to be a really good player. And that's your pathway to becoming a high tier competitive player. Or no, I'm good. I'm not gonna go to regionals. I just wanna be a better player. I want to be better at deck building. I want my deck to feel like it's cohesive, because that is sometimes hard to do in our game. And you collaborate with another person, or you collaborate. So you go back to the drawing board after taking feedback from the person you played against and yourself, because you learned stuff, and you focus in on that type thing again. And that's basically my biggest hint. And like way to say this is, there's a way to start the pathway on what kind of player that you want to be. I think when you start off, you should just go and find things that you'd like. And I think our game does a good job of that, because of how many IPs there are, how many different ways to play the game there are. I wouldn't have said this years and years ago, because like, at least now when I look at the game and I like look at a character like Rodan from a challenger deck and I go, "Oh, this guy screams like defensive gameplay but then has a little bit of offense because he gives speed to things, right?" And then at the same time, I go look at the Toga 3 deck, and you're like, wow, this deck's gonna beat ass. And you're like, well, those are two different players in my opinion. This player wants to play this way, the aggro player wants to play this way. Here's two different typos, you're off to the races. So I think there are enough resources in our game to find a starting point, typically a challenger deck, for a player to find something that they enjoy with the playstyle that they like. And then that's the beginning of the path. And I would say that's probably the best way to do it. Going back to Barlow's question earlier, that segues a little past what we're talking about that I'm not going to dive into, but the idea is that path, and however far you want to take it, is what you want to do. You don't have to do the thing that we just talked about with Barlow. You don't have to ever aim for that hump. You don't ever have to do that. Honestly, I don't think it's for everybody. I think being a competitive anything is not for everybody, because it's stressful. It's got some mental health tax, is, people are like, we are our own biggest critics. So like, I just sometimes think it's not for everybody. And then on the other side, I'm going to use words from a friend of ours. Games are meant to be fun. You should find the way to play UniVersus the way that you want to play it, because it's a card game and games are meant to be fun. So obviously the easiest question is, out of all those paths and what I said, you should find something that's fun. And if you're not having fun, we need to find another path. And I'm going to say this, for some people that I've taught this game to, sometimes no matter how many different paths you try, it's not fun for them. And maybe the answer is that UniVersus isn't fun to them, because it's not for everybody. But I don't think that's true for most people. I think the hardest part is getting in and getting off the floor. And I'm not saying that my answer is a good answer, but I think there is certain pathways to get off the floor.
I'm gonna take it a little less focused and a little more ambiguous. I think one of the biggest issues, the biggest mistake, a consistent mistake, I get to take the word new out. It does apply to new players, but I think the bell curve wraps all the way around and applies to like hyper competitive veteran players as well. And it is just the fact that the idea of winning or losing is just the end of the game. The thing that you should be focusing on are the decisions that you make inside of the game, right? The end of the game being a win or a loss matters significantly less than you playing correctly inside the game. If you play correctly, it should result in a win. If you play correctly and it results in a loss, and there are things that you can do and you can spot places where you played incorrectly that gave you that loss, I think that is one of the best ways to get better, right? At not winning and top cutting and whatever, and getting that check mark, the W next to your name. It is more of having a full understanding and really fleshed out vision of how to play the game, right? Because the game is all about is all about the journey, right? It's trying to reach the top of the mountain rather than just like constantly winning all the time, right? Like we all have a shared goal of I want to be the person that wins the tournament, but there are 99% of players playing in any event are losers. They just are. The second place guy is by definition a loser. He lost. That's why he got second. And so focusing on the win or the loss can be really devastating. And so focus on what's happening inside of the game rather than the result at the end, if that makes sense. Because this is a game where your skill and your decisions will shine through a majority of the time. When we talked about the percentages that we play, that we had from the last question of like Barrett said, the best player in the whole wide world, the absolute number one most consistent player only wins 70% of the time. That means they lose 30% of the time. If that person who loses 30% of the time goes, shucks, I suck because of the L that happened at the end of the game, and does not track anything that happened previously, they're never going to actually get better or have a fully flushed out understanding of what it is that we're doing. And it goes back to what Barrett said. We're playing a game. The game has to be fun in the middle part. The game's not fun at the end. The game's fun because of the decisions you made to get to the end.
One of my most favorite moments playing this game at a high level was a loss. And I will never forget it. And the person that I played against, I have so much respect for, because the reality is when I took a step back and I reassessed the game after it was over, like I played out of my mind at what was essentially probably just an unwinnable matchup. And I was still so close.
Yeah.
And I lost, which resulted in not winning the whole tournament. But like it was very impactful to me. And that is somebody who has won a couple of things. The losses mean just as much as the wins do, as long as you're okay with viewing them that way. And the point I'm trying to get, I'm glad you brought this up, because I didn't talk about assessing your play at all in what I was talking about. And I think what you're saying is correct. You know, like you can play any deck. And our game is hard. And I think part of the reason I didn't talk about it is because genuinely everybody makes mistakes when you play. Everyone does. And being the better player on the day is who makes the least amount of mistakes.
Even like we're taking it to like a really hyper competitive. I mean, we're both very competitive players.
Yeah.
All three of us in here, genuinely just playing the game to the best of your abilities and saying, "Hey, 2 games ago, and when I had a split decision of, do I commit this foundation to give my move +2 speed, or do I leave it ready to pass another attack card, and I choose option A versus option B when I get into that pattern recognition, and I choose the better outcome, because in any situation either one of them could have been correct, but I chose the better outcome for this situation, that's a win. You won in that interaction. There are winning. There's the big W. I've been on a new big kick of Tam being crazy, of micro decisions and macro decisions for the entire game, right? Of me committing this for +2 speed might micro decision win me the game, or win me the turn, but on the macro it loses me the game because I have a committed foundation and I cannot defend myself, right? Like the butterfly effect of just actively enjoying and playing the game better. That's what you should focus on, not necessarily what does the scoreboard look like at the end of the tournament. Oh, I went 3-0, not dropping a game. Okay, but did you play amazing? Like, what was your play like? That's what matters. Did I go 0-3, but my play was really good? You should feel just as proud. Yeah, I had 6 incredibly tough, long games, and I think I played really well. And I see the spots where I messed up. I know that I can fix that for next time. I think that's important.
And I think it's even more accentuated in our game because our game has crazy ripple effects because of how many cards we check and how many cards we play and how many cards we get to see. That micro decision that you made on turn 2 to attempt to block this move or hold on that one extra card is one extra card that you didn't play for turn 6 of the game, when the cards that you're like, I need to draw one attack card to kill my opponent because I survived with incredible defense, and you go to draw and you drew all gray and you went fuck, and you go to make a check for that first card and it was the orange card. And all of that, if you really want to go back into all the micro decisions, if you played everything else out perfectly and the only thing you changed was that, did I play a block here to check one more card, you would have drawn that move.
How many times have you reviewed a foundation when your rival does not attack you and you could have freely built that foundation and you missed your check by 1 on turn 6?
Our game has crazy ripples.
So much.
I think that is such a high level, like very introspective, like way of assessing your gameplay, which is like really cool if that's the way that you learn and you're analytical. But like bringing it back to like, as you said, new player centric and things like that. I think doing stuff like that is a very quick way to like not enjoy your experience when trying to get into the game.
Yeah.
But if you are someone that is trying to become hyper competitive, that is one small thing that you have to consider in the giant pool of what our game is. Because I'm a big deck builder, and none of what we're talking about has anything to do with the precursors and the ripple effects that occur depending on if you chose to play 67 cards or 60 cards or 61 cards in your deck, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And everything in our game, when you come down to how do I get better at any step of the way, comes down to every single pebble that you can drop in the pond.
So, Rebby, you asked the question. We gave you 2 incredibly 20-minute long-winded answers. Do you have any sand to add into the massive rocks that we've put in this container of what do you think is a consistent mistake that new players make?
Yeah, in my opinion, I think one of the biggest mistakes, I'm so sorry. One of the biggest mistakes new players make is they come into this game and they assume instantly they have to take a competitive stance on this game and really start grinding into the meta and understanding what is winning, what is top cutting, really getting into that win-loss kind of mindset that you guys had mentioned. And I think as a new player, the biggest focus should be understanding your fundamentals. I think this game is extremely hard if you don't know the bare minimum of how this game works. If you don't understand how forms work, how responses work, how to play attacks, how to block, why building is important, and just those tactics, I think you can really struggle and you're never going to truly make it to the next step to really enhance like how you play as a player. And this is one thing that has kind of been on my mind. I taught my dad how to play using the Critical Role starter decks recently. And
How much experience does your dad have playing card games?
he has played regular card games like poker, blackjack,
Oh, a
those very
52 card deck game.
Yeah.
52
Okay.
card deck games. He
Yeah.
has never touched a trading card game in his life. So it was really interesting to see the perspective it can take in UniVersus being your first card game and the overwhelming amount of choices. The it just can feel like so much and you don't know what you're doing. And it kind of made me think, I think people are so obsessed with playing the newest, hottest thing that they're not understanding the game. And I've like watched my locals struggle with understanding bare concepts after 3 months of starting the game. And I'm like, oh, I don't understand. But if they consistently switch characters and you're always playing the new hot thing, you're learning too many gameplay styles. And you're just not learning the bare minimum, right?
I
I
would
think
I
agree.
think
Yeah, stick
it's
with what you
really
like.
yeah, I think it's really important to pick one thing, understand it, and then move on. You can play as many characters as you want, but I think you have to understand the bare basics of this game.
yeah, there is something about so me and Barrett have a mutual friend, Tyler Clark, who when he learned to play the game, he essentially learned to play the game on a character very similar to Grog, who was if you don't block, reduce the damage that you would take by whatever. And so he played very heavy damage reduction type decks, and because of that, and never really when he was learning to play the game, he didn't actually learn how to block successfully. And so when he eventually switched off of playing Grog, he was getting mollywopped because he just didn't understand when he was or wasn't supposed to block. He was blocking bad moves or not blocking the good moves, and it like even things like
Right.
that of like there's an example to like fight your point of maybe he should have in his
Yeah.
development switched off of something, but if you want to be you always should have a main focus of the thing that you're doing, right? He should play this Grog deck and become a master at Grog and have something in the pocket, right? Even if it's something a little less powerful or whatever, experiment, but have this thing that you're focusing on, your main identity. Like for right now, myself, the main deck that I'm focusing on is I'm playing Pony. Pony is the deck that I am actively trying to make, and I'm honing and making it. And I'm making sure that every time that I pick up a hand, I know exactly what I've got going on. But my fun side deck is Jester, which plays absolutely nothing like Pony. Absolutely nothing like Pony. And I need to make sure that both of these muscles are being flexed and pushed, and they play the game fundamentally the same. They're playing attacks and they're playing foundations, and sometimes they're playing backups. And it is important to it's important for me to understand how all of these cards interact with each other at the core level of the game before moving on to a third thing, a Midoriya deck, a Grog, right? And so I can totally see that of somebody who is bouncing around a little too excitedly week to week to week, not fully flushing out an idea to be hindering themselves in their learning process.
100% agree.
If you are a new player and you're listening to this, or if you or anyone in chat is working with new players, I would be not afraid to have the conversation with your new players of like, what are
I
you
am
shaking your head
reading
at?
I am
Oh,
reading Fidu's comment,
oh,
which I will not be
my bad.
reading out loud.
You
That
need to
is a
have the
crazy
conversation
thing
with
to
your
say.
players because to me, and I would say this also as like a teacher, you need to know when your players are using trigger phrases or trigger words of like my favorite one in UniVersus when I hear people say is, "Oh, I didn't know you could do that." And then we get to have a lesson. You know, like we get to sit down and talk about it because if we didn't understand that specific thing, you can then have a conversation about like a much broader aspect because everything in our game builds upon itself. Things can relate and interact with each other. And so like uh, it, there's can be some new players that like get frustrated because like their deck isn't working or something like that, and then when you have and you spread everything out and you like talk about their decks or you talk about how they're playing or you talk about how they're doing things, you know, like I know Tam does all the time. When Tam plays with newer players, he'll like pause the game, like he'll just like actually pause the game and like have a conversation with them, which is like a good way to teach somebody. But I think even if they've been playing for months, like that's maybe not the best thing to do, but the idea is you play a turn and like you beat them or something, and you go, hey, why didn't you use this thing? Because I was banking on the fact that you were going to use this crazy defensive piece and it would have saved you. And you're like, and they're like, oh, I didn't know I could do that. And you go, oh, okay, well, let's talk about it. Because if you had done it and you can like rewind time and do stuff like that, like that's my favorite trigger phrase for this game, because there's a lot in this game that could be the probing part of that, because there's so much going on. But I agree with you at the fundamentals level, Revy, of like, I don't know the last time I asked the question, I didn't know you could, or I didn't know. I don't remember the last time I said I didn't know you could do that in UniVersus, because when you have the fundamentals down, you don't have to do it anymore. You've done it.
Right.
Like you have the foundations. Not to use the word foundation in our game that uses foundations, but you have those building blocks.
Great.
And it is just about building up from there, right? You said Tyler Clark. Mark Tyner, your former Worlds and Nationals champion, has played 0 other card games before he got into UniVersus. And in roughly a year and a half's time, he won back-to-back majors for character cards. UniVersus was his first card game. UniVersus, he didn't play any other TCGs before then.
The guy's a grinder, though, for sure.
He was a
That
grind.
guy's
And
a
in the beginning of the
grinder.
game, because you can ask Sam, in the beginning when he got in, he was bad.
Yep.
Like not good bad. And he had incredible teachers that were like people that built upon the game and had a big part of the Omaha community. He did have good teachers. It just hadn't clicked yet. But when it clicked,
Oof.
he became a menace.
Oof. Ready. Final thoughts.
Final thoughts. I think for anyone listening that is truly a new player, I think really listen to what Barrett and Tam said, and that I think the really big stepping stones is starting with the demos, going to challenger decks, starter decks, and then finally, sorry, I'm still coughing really bad. Really get into deck building afterwards. I think the challenger and starter decks, while they might not be appealing to a veteran eye, I think they're really important and really a necessity to the game. And these aren't high impact decks, but man, they're going to teach me a strategy. They're going to teach me a gameplay style, and they have a point. And it's not me throwing 60 cards together and hoping it works with my fingers crossed. They were developed, they were worked.
As somebody who has to play challenger decks in their brick form a lot, I'll tell you another thing that's really good at building fundamentals is PvE experiences. They're very good at building fundamentals asterisks, but when you and your personal deck need to figure out how to press buttons, they're pretty good for that.
I'm sorry, you said PvE?
And the reason I said PvE,
Speaking of,
like boss battles?
yeah, like a boss battle. Yeah,
Interesting.
that's what other people call them.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, you're totally
I'm
right.
just saying because like
And you're saying that's
fun.
a good thing for new players.
Yeah, I think it's fun.
Interesting.
And it's good for doing and using your fundamentals, because you need to know how your deck works. And so like when the Critical Role Vox Machina thing came out and there was that boss battle or whatever, the Briarwoods, like I thought that was fun to sit down with not just older players like new veterans, but new players because they like Critical Role, and they shoved a bunch of attacks at this little Briarwoods piece of cardboard. It was a good time, not just for me, but it was also fun.
I love that. Ready? Thank you so much for being on the show. It was wonderful. Incredible. Thank you so much.
yep, thank you. Bye.